one of the things that I love about the space, obviously, the people that you get to meet. And so we met probably around Thanksgiving and, had the opportunity to work together. And I got to learn a lot about the industry from you, Allison Benedict, Director of Procurement, Copper State Farms. How are you today? You are standing, well, or sitting at least,
Yeah,
and alive. So you survived 420.
I did. Yeah, I'm doing great today. The day after 420 is one of my favorite days because it kind of have the exhale of all the preparation that goes into such an important holiday.
Yeah, what's it like as a director of procurement? And, I guess I should preface a little bit of the conversation by saying, we love talking to people who really make an impact in the space. We consider this part of our thought leader series. So people who really have their finger on the pulse, I know you're one of those people. So getting back to 420, you survive it. The day after is great. What's it like leading up to it?
It's a lot of planning, honestly, trying to be thoughtful about what types of products you're going to offer, what kind of promotions are going to drive people in. It's one of the biggest sale days of the year, and everyone's really buying for the attention of the consumer. And so it goes in a lot of planning into that and making sure that, from my perspective, everything arrives on time and in the quantities that we expect, the way that we expect, so that way we can service people quickly and with the products that they're looking for.
Yeah, and there's no doubt like Copper State Farms, well-known name in the Arizona market.
Yeah.
You guys have a tremendous footprint, both in terms of dispensary as well as the farm up in Snowflake. And we'll,
Yeah.
we'll talk about that in a second. But how far out do you start planning for this, right? Like I would imagine you don't start last week getting ready for 420.
No, no. I mean, if you want to be thoughtful about the types of strains and things that you're offering on the menu that day, then you have to be planning what you're growing in your cultivation 6 months in advance of that and make sure that you understand how to prepare that way. And then when you're sourcing outside, and whether it's a medicated item or a non-medicated item, you want to do a gift with purchase, for example, any of those things, especially getting them in a cost effective way, if it's a free item, you have to plan, 18 weeks maybe if you're getting it internationally. And it's something very custom.
Well, I didn't think about it that way. So it's obviously not just your department, right? You're working with sales, marketing, branding. Who all
Yeah,
is involved in all of this?
pretty much the entire organization, especially with a vertical license like Copper State Farms, where we have our own cultivation, we have our own manufacturing and our own retail, and we can maximize that channel. The whole team plans for something like this.
Very cool. And so, sort of tease the farm up in Snowflake,
Yeah.
arguably, when you think about, vertical integration, you think about cultivation within the space, there may not be a more unique place where you're either growing cannabis or the setup of the farm, right? We're talking over 1 million square feet under glass. It's like
Yeah.
5,600 feet of elevation, sunlight all the time. Like it's an ideal
Yeah.
thing, right? And then
Right.
your company makes this huge announcement, I think at the beginning of March, we're going to double that footprint.
Yeah.
What's it like to be a part of, Copper State at this point, seeing that expansion? And what ultimately is that going to mean for somebody in your position?
Yeah, honestly, it's just a joy to be a part of something like that because you're watching what is already a very mature, very successful, and profitable organization start to take that next step and say, what we've done in the past got us to where we are. And now we're going to renovate enough that we can mature in the right ways, build the right kind of operational team, automate in the right places so that way we can scale and we can double our production without having to double the number of people, for example, that are already working at what is a very large facility. And especially being in such a remote location like Snowflake and the surrounding communities, people are willing to travel, especially to have such a fun job. But there's only so many people who live there. So we have to be really thoughtful about how we scale, and automation is a huge part of that. And that's something that I've been able to work on since I joined the Copper State team, and really thinking about how, where, and why we're going to automate. Finding and sourcing that equipment is something that I get to be a part of. And again, kind of connecting all the different pieces of the organization, understanding what marketing and branding is trying to accomplish, and purchasing machines that can help us achieve that at scale. Because if we're not at scale, then we're just not really being honest about who we are in the market and what we're trying to service people with. And we are that huge provider, and we try to keep our costs low so that way we can pass that on to our customers.
That's really interesting. I think one of the biggest takeaways for me from that is, when I think of procurement, I'm thinking of products, right? But you're taking it a step further. Like you're actually looking at the equipment itself. And I would assume, and break it down for me in terms of automation, whether it's packaging or flower trimming, I'm not sure, but
Yeah,
all of that is sort of falls under your
really.
umbrella.
Yeah. Yeah, it does. I have the pleasure of being able to work with and across the organization, being able to also bring in our outside partners and those strategic partnerships that take what we have internally and what our internal team is looking for, and finding and sourcing, whether that's a service or a piece of equipment or a consumable item. We're here to really make sure that they have what they need so that they can meet these huge production expectations that we have. And it's really a fun thing to be a part of. And supply chain is unique like that, where you get to really play in all the spaces, and that's what really draws me to that type of work.
I'm curious too, what in terms of automation, how important is that going to be for the space moving forward, in your opinion?
Yeah, I think that it's going to be incredibly important. I think that there has continued to be an evolution in the space, and people have pushed and taken some of the best practices from our kind of um analogous other industries. For example, CPG, like consumer packaged goods, there's a lot that we can learn from there, obviously through the lens of cannabis. And I think it is important to always remember that cannabis is cannabis, and so you apply those right kind of solutions. But when we're talking about packaging, when the medicine is already well within its container and we're just putting it into an exterior box or into a case box, to automate something like that honestly makes people's jobs better, because folding those boxes all day is not something that is a job that people want to sustain in. And part of being Copper State and being one of the best places to work is that we want to give people worthwhile jobs to have. And automation can help us to do that.
Very cool. Sticking in the Arizona market, voters passed Prop 207 back in November. And it's like we went to sleep, we woke up the next day, and Arizona flipped a switch. Like I'm viewing that from like a total outsider's perspective, a couple thousand miles away.
Yeah.
I would imagine like you guys are running around with your hair on fire. What is the Arizona market like for somebody who's, so focused on Colorado or Massachusetts or Pennsylvania, anywhere else?
I think that what has always made Arizona a little bit different from all of those places is just the way the regulatory body interacts with the licensees. It's a very mutual relationship, and it has been from the start. AZDHS from the very beginning has always said, we don't know either what the right things to do. And we wrote these laws kind of in a vacuum, and they've continued to make the small changes so people could operate better as we learned. And then I think they felt very confident because of how successful and the quality of operators in the medical market and the tenure of the operators in the medical market, that they very confidently moved into rec. And I think that's why we moved so quickly. It definitely was very fast. It certainly was faster than any of us really anticipated by several months. And so it was a stressful time, but it was also a very historic and like exciting time to be a part of something so monumental for the state. And at Copper State, we immediately applied for our adult use, dual licensing. We were approved very early on the first or second day that they were actually approving people. And we decided to take another 6-7 days almost until we started offering adult use sales because there was just a few things that we wanted to make sure that we had in order. For example, that we had both a medical and an adult use line, and that our online ordering for our medical patients was going to be very uh, as smooth a process as they had come to expect from us, and that we had the right type of priority within our operations and the right amount of product on hand so that we could service people properly. And we were able to do that with just taking a few extra days. And I think it was definitely the right time for us to go live. And it was very successful. And we've continued to see a very steady increase in both adult use and medical patients.
Wow. Are there still kinks that you think need to be worked out on the recreational side, or, you know, what needs to change, if anything, do you think?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing that is, and this is true, and people from other markets that have gone through this transition could probably sympathize, but testing is a bottleneck for us, where we're used to, or you could come to expect to have your test results back within 24 hours or maybe 48 hours. We're now experiencing 15-day to 30-day
Wow.
delays in testing results. And so we have, for example, we could have a ton of product that's ready as far as a cure perspective and a production perspective, ready for market. And we're just waiting on maybe final testing. And that, I think, is a chain and a bottleneck within the whole industry right now. A lot of people are feeling that.
Yeah, I remember from my time just living in California, that being an issue there as well. And right, all parts of the industry sort of have to catch up and work together. And so it's not out of the norm, but the hope would be that we get to a point where that's no longer an issue.
Yeah. And I think all the labs are working on that. I think they are acutely aware of the issue.
I'm sure. I'm sure they are. So, you know, one other, you know, thing that I always like to ask people who have been in the industry for a long time, and you've got over 7 years in it, which, as we know, is basically 50 years in any other industry. You should be retiring, um, because of how much goes
Soon,
into this.
hopefully.
But like, as you know, and I'm sure you hear it all the time, right? Like, I want to get into cannabis. It's the fastest growing industry.
Yep.
It's so exciting. How do you do it? Like, what do you tell those people? What sort of recommendations do you give them? And what sort of frame of mind do they need to have as they pursue this journey?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I want and try to nurture their enthusiasm because obviously you want that kind of passion. It's a very kind of passionate industry naturally. People are very have energetic feelings about cannabis one way or another. And so I always encourage that, but the reality is you really need to do your research. If you are trying to operate within a specific market, become familiar with the regulations because the regulatory element of cannabis is the most difficult part of it. And we have more regulatory restrictions and we're held to a higher account than a lot of other industries are. And so it would be very wise to understand what you're getting into and what the expectation is going to be of you as to be an operator and a participant in the space. And if you are going to be in the space, take it seriously about operating at a high bar because it reflects poorly on all of us if people are trying to clown around, honestly, because it's still something that people are learning to accept. And in the 7 years that I have had the pleasure of being a part of it, the opinion has become much more accepting and willing to understand it more, but there's a long way to go. And if you want to be a part of that journey, do your research about the company you're interested in, make sure you understand how secure that organization is and what their intentions are for growth, because it's a dynamic space. Be willing to continue to learn. Make sure you don't feel like you know everything because no one does. And if you start acting like you do, then
Amen.
you're already far behind.
I love that you
Yeah, it's
said that.
about, I would say, approaching a learning. Yeah.
I think, I go back to some of our earliest conversations, right? And I say this to most people I talk to. Like, I think two things about the cannabis industry. One, the importance of relationships. And, I think if that applies right to any industry, but I think this one, especially because of how small it is,
Right.
and how quickly you can meet other people or, be denied that opportunity, based on your actions. But the other thing, and I think the most important thing, and we talked about this, is that in my opinion, and this is, what do I know? I'm just one person, but I don't think that there are any experts, right? It changes every day.
Right.
We learn something new
Exactly.
every day, and what you're doing in Arizona is completely different than what's occurring here in Ohio, and what may be occurring in
Exactly.
Phoenix is different than Mesa, right? So going into it with that open mind
Absolutely.
and being willing to be willing to be a sponge, right? Learn as much as you can, educate yourself as much as possible,
Yes.
but go into the conversation thinking maybe you don't know anything. Just ask a lot of questions, try to learn as much
Yeah.
as possible.
Exactly right. Exactly right. And the people who I've seen do that continue to be successful in the space. So,
I love that. It's really good advice. And thank you for sharing those experiences with us. It's always a pleasure to talk to you,
yeah.
Allison.
Yeah. You too, Max.